I always thought I had my life figured out, or at least stable enough to not fall apart over a single letter in the mail. I was 29, married, had a steady job at a marketing firm, a dog that chewed only my husband's shoes, and a little blue house with chipped white shutters that we always swore we'd repaint next spring. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Predictable, manageable, safe. Kids were something we talked about like a vacation plan. Someday, after the next promotion, when the mortgage feels less terrifying. The way couples postpone life until they're ready, not realizing no one ever really is. Then one Tuesday morning, while brushing my teeth before work, I realized I'd been waiting for my period for longer than usual. I laughed it off at first. My cycle's never been on time. But there was a box of pregnancy tests in the back of the bathroom drawer from the just-in-case conversation we'd had months earlier. 2 minutes later, I was sitting on the cold tile floor staring at 2 pink lines. 2 clear, bold, unapologetic pink lines. I remember feeling everything at once. Shock, panic, this weird flutter of happiness that I tried to push down because it didn't seem logical. My husband, Aaron, had left for an early meeting, and for a second I thought about calling him right away. But then I stopped. Something about the moment felt too fragile. Like if I said it out loud too soon, it might disappear. So I hid the test in my nightstand drawer, went to work, smiled through meetings, and spent the entire day with this electric hum in my chest. You're pregnant? You're actually pregnant. That night I planned to tell him. I made his favorite dinner, pasta carbonara, garlic bread, the cheap Merlot he pretended to like because it was our first date wine. I even lit a candle, which sounds ridiculous in retrospect. He came home late, always did lately. His job at the architecture firm had become demanding, which was Aaron speak for, I don't want to talk about it. He walked in, kissed me on the cheek, complimented the smell, and spent the next 15 minutes answering emails at the table. When I finally said, Aaron, I have something to tell you, he looked up, polite, distracted. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the candlelight. He blinked once, twice, then forced a small laugh. You're serious? I nodded. He rubbed the back of his neck, his tell when something bothered him. Wow. Okay, that's sooner than I thought. There it was, the first crack. Not anger, not joy, just discomfort. Over the next few days, we pretended everything was fine. He kissed my forehead before work, asked how I was feeling, and even mentioned baby names once, jokingly. But something was off. He was quieter, colder. His phone, once left anywhere, now followed him from room to room. I convinced myself it was just stress. We'd figure it out. We always did. Then, 2 weeks later, the letter came. It was a regular white envelope from Hopewell Fertility Clinic, the place where we'd done a single round of IVF the year before, back when we were struggling to conceive. It had failed, and after that we decided to let nature handle it. So a letter from them out of nowhere felt strange. I opened it at the kitchen counter, coffee still in my hand. Dear Mrs. Harper, we are writing to inform you of an irregularity discovered during a recent internal audit of laboratory procedures. This may have involved the mislabeling of certain cryogenic samples processed between January and March of last year. We strongly recommend you contact our legal department to discuss next steps. First, the words didn't register. I read them again, slower this time. Mislabeling. Cryogenic samples. Between January and March. That was our cycle. Our embryos. I called Aaron at work, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Hey, weird question. I started trying to sound calm. Did you get any calls from Hopewell Clinic lately? He paused. What? No. Why? I read him the letter. The line went quiet. Then, it's probably a formality. Don't panic. Okay? They'd call if it was serious. But something in his tone, too dismissive, made my stomach twist. I spent the next hour Googling every possible combination of IVF clinic mix-up, Hopewell lawsuit, embryo error. What I found made my blood run cold. A couple in Oregon, same clinic, was suing for embryonic negligence. Another in Nevada had discovered their embryo was implanted in the wrong woman. Somewhere between panic and nausea, I realized this wasn't hypothetical. That night, I waited for Aaron to come home. He didn't. At 10:47 p.m. a text appeared. "Sorry, late meeting. Don't wait up." By midnight, I was still at the table. That letter unfolded in front of me like evidence. The next morning, I called the clinic. The receptionist transferred me to Dr. Price, who used the word unfortunate so many times it stopped sounding like English. He said they had reason to believe one of our stored embryos might have been mislabeled and transferred to another patient. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my hand cramped. "So what are you saying?" I asked. "That my child, the baby I'm carrying right now, isn't biologically mine?" He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harper, we don't want to jump to conclusions. We'd like you and your husband to come in for testing, just to verify." I hung up. For the next hour, I paced the living room, tears streaming down my face, whispering, "No, no, no." I touched my stomach, not even showing yet, and felt a wave of panic so raw I could hardly breathe. When Aaron came home that evening, I was waiting for him with the letter on the table. He didn't even look surprised. "They called you, didn't they?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yesterday. You knew." I wanted to wait until we had more information. Information? I laughed, bitter and shaky. "Aaron, they're saying our embryo might not be ours. Do you understand what that means?" He ran a hand through his hair. "We don't even know if that's the case. Maybe it's a mistake. And even if it isn't?" "Even if it isn't?" My voice cracked. "Then what, Aaron? Do I just give birth to someone else's child and hand them over like a borrowed book?" He didn't answer. That was the night something broke between us for good. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a thread snapping under too much tension. 3 days later, we sat in a sterile white office under fluorescent lights that made everything look too bright, too real. Across from us was a woman in a navy suit, the clinic's attorney, and Dr. Price, who avoided eye contact. They apologized, explained, said there'd been a data entry error when labeling the storage units. Our embryo had likely been implanted in another woman's uterus, and the one implanted in mine belonged to a different couple. There was talk of potential compensation, confidential settlements, avoiding media exposure. I barely heard any of it. All I could think about was the ultrasound photo in my purse. A tiny blur of life that suddenly didn't feel like mine, yet completely was. When we got to the car, I expected Aaron to explode, to rage, to demand answers. Instead, he stared out the windshield and said, "Maybe this is for the best." I turned to him. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" He sighed. "We wanted a baby, right? We have one. Does it really matter?" "It matters, Aaron," I snapped. "It matters to me." He didn't respond. He just started the car. That silence stretched for weeks. At night, I'd lie awake feeling the faintest flutter beneath my ribs and wonder if the woman out there, the one carrying our embryo, was feeling the same. If she knew, if she'd been told. And then, one Friday morning, the clinic called again. They'd located the other family. They wanted to arrange a meeting. Mismatched. They scheduled it for a Wednesday at 2 p.m., which felt rude somehow. Like bad news should at least have the decency to happen at night, after dinner, when the world is already dim and quiet. But no, a bright weekday, a full parking lot, a waiting room with a mounted TV playing an interview about spring allergies, while my life lined up to be measured and notarized. The clinic put us in a consultation suite, which is a fancy way to say small office with soft lamps and ugly art. There was a round table, for chairs, tissues already placed in the center like a centerpiece nobody wanted, and a tray with water bottles we didn't touch. I remember the thermostat clicking on and off like a metronome. I remember the lights humming. Mostly I remember my hands, how I couldn't figure out what to do with them. Folded in my lap felt too formal. On the table felt aggressive. I kept reaching for the water and setting it back down unopened, like a visual stutter. They arrived a few minutes after us, ushered in by the clinic's attorney. A couple in their early 30s, maybe. He was tall, neat beard, the kind of guy who wears a watch that isn't flashy but still tells you something. She had dark hair pulled into a low twist, a simple navy dress, and the alert, scanning eyes of a person who doesn't want to miss the trap door under her feet. When they sat, we all smiled because that's what you do when you're about to talk about the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Evan and Lena, the attorney said, like she was introducing panelists on a morning show. And of course, Aaron and Sarah. She knew my name. I know she did, but she still looked at her notes before saying it. We all murmured hellos. The air felt crowded with words none of us wanted to be the first to speak. Dr. Price started. He had a folder with colored tabs and a voice he probably practiced for situations like this, low, even so controlled it almost sounded like white noise. He explained what we already knew. An error in labeling, an audit that found it, the high statistical likelihood that the embryo transferred into my uterus belonged to Evan and Lena, and that the embryo transferred into Lena's uterus belonged to Aaron and me. I didn't look at Aaron. I couldn't handle the dry composure I knew I'd see there, the management of optics. Instead, I watched Lena. At the word likelihood, her jaw tightened. At belonged to. Her eyes flicked to me and then to my stomach, and then away like she was embarrassed by the reflex. We want to be respectful, she said finally, voice steady but thin around the edges. We don't know you. You don't know us. This is... None of us asked for this. I nodded because I didn't trust my mouth not to do something reckless. Evan cleared his throat. Our OB says everything looks good so far. He said it like he was offering proof of something, like he needed us to know they were competent caretakers of what was, on paper, ours. Then, almost apologetically, she's in her second trimester. I felt that in my ribs like a door slamming. Second trimester. We were a trimester apart, 2 trains leaving the same station on different tracks, somehow headed toward the same destination. The attorney slid a document toward the center of the table. We understand the emotional complexity here. We also want to be mindful of everyone's legal options. There are pathways we can consider. We would ask that, for now, all parties agree not to engage with media and to keep discussions confidential while we explore solutions. I stared at the word solutions on the page. The paper had a watermark. Of course it did. People pay extra for a special watermark to make their paper look official while your life is bleeding out on it. We're not signing anything today, I said, before Aaron could smooth talk or ask for clarifications. We can listen. We can ask questions. But I'm not signing anything. Lena glanced at me, almost grateful, like I'd said the thing she didn't want to have to be the one to say. Of course, the attorney said. No pressure today. Which is how you know there was pressure. Dr. Price ran through the options like he was reading a menu. Genetic testing to confirm with absolute certainty. Third-party mediation. Custody arrangements, should either couple choose to assert parental rights. He used phrases like good faith, best interests of the child, and collaborative frameworks, words that have never changed a diaper at 3 a.m. Aaron finally spoke. What happens if both couples want to raise their biological child? His tone was calm, curious, like he was asking about parking validation. The attorney folded her hands. Historically, courts have prioritized genetic ties, especially when the infants are still newborns. That said, there are cases where gestational and psychological bonds are weighed heavily. It's complicated. So there are winners and losers, Evan said flatly. There are families, Dr. Price said, as if that was comforting. We agreed to the testing. We agreed to a follow-up meeting. We did not agree to anything else. When we stood to leave, Lena touched the back of a chair, grounding herself. Can I ask you something? She said, eyes on me. Have you felt anything? Movement? I shook my head. Not yet, just the flutters. I had felt them the night before, like a fish turning in shallow water. I hadn't told Aaron. She nodded, swallowing. I keep thinking I do, and then I don't, and then I do. It's like my body is a room where someone keeps switching the lights on and off. I wanted to say something kind. I wanted to say something fierce. What came out was simple. I'm sorry, I said, For all of it. Me too, she said. We looked at each other like women do when there isn't a script. In the hallway, Aaron fell into step beside me. You were good in there, he said, which made me feel like a junior associate who'd nailed a presentation. I pushed the elevator button too hard and watched the numbers light up, floor by floor, like we were being counted down. In the car, he said, we should consider what a settlement could do. We could set the kid up for college, pay off the mortgage, start fresh. I turned to him. Start fresh with what, Aaron? Who's fresh? There's a human involved, not a house refinance. I'm being practical, he said, which is a word people use when they don't want to look at the thing you're pointing at. I opened my mouth to argue and then shut it again. I didn't have the energy to fight and drive. The testing was a blur. Swabs, vials, signatures, consent forms with paragraphs that sounded like they'd been translated from another language and then back again. A nurse asked if I had any questions and I almost laughed. My questions didn't fit into the boxes on her form. That weekend, my best friend Olivia came over with groceries and a look that said she was ready to break laws on my behalf. I told her everything. I watched it hit her in waves. The breathless disbelief, the anger, the list-making brain she has that always looks for the next step when the floor drops out. Okay, she said, setting down a bag of spinach like it had personally offended her. First things first, you're not alone. Second, do not sign anything without your own attorney. Not theirs. Not the clinic's. Yours. Third, I will now make you grilled cheese and we will eat it like we are 12 because right now you need fat and familiarity. I cried into a paper towel while she buttered bread and cussed out the clinic under her breath. Later, while we ate on the couch, she said, what do you want? Not what's fair, not what they might give you. What do you actually want? The question landed in my chest and just sat there. Nobody had asked me that yet. Everyone wanted to talk options, outcomes, optics. Me? I wanted a life that didn't require a legal glossary. I wanted my baby, whoever that was, whatever that meant now, to be okay. I wanted to not be the kind of person who could be bought. I don't know, I said, and the not knowing scared me more than anything. I know I don't want to be talked into a settlement so everyone else can feel better. Olivia nodded. Good. That's a start. Also, I looked up the clinic. She pulled out her phone. They've been sued before. Quietly. NDAs all over it. I can't get the details, but the headlines exist. I didn't ask how long she'd been digging. Olivia is the kind of friend who doesn't say, let me know if you need anything. She shows up with spinach and evidence. When she left, I stood in the doorway watching her walk to her car, feeling both steadier and more hollow. It's a weird thing to be held together by other people's competence. The results came back a week later. Dr. Price called, and even before he said the words, I knew. He used confirm and match, and with certainty. He said our embryo was implanted in Lena's uterus and theirs was implanted in mine. He said there would be another meeting. He said I'm sorry, and I believed that, in his way, he was. I called Aaron and told him, and he was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said finally. Then I think we should be realistic. About what? About the fact that we can't raise 2 infants. About the fact that the courts may give them custody of the baby you're carrying. About the fact that we might not want to fight this. I stared at the toaster like it could give me an answer. You don't want to fight for our child? He sighed, a sound I had started to hate. I'm saying we should consider a solution that minimizes damage. To whom? I said. To your career? To the clinic? To your schedule? He didn't answer. And there it was, the feeling I'd been trying to outrun. I was going to have to do this without him, even if he was physically present. There are kinds of leaving that don't require a packed bag. At the second meeting, there was a mediator, a woman with soft eyes and legal pads. She introduced herself as Dana and said her job was to help us navigate this with grace. I wanted to ask if she'd ever given birth. Instead, I nodded, because that's what nice people do. We talked about timelines. If both pregnancies continued, there would be 2 births potentially months apart. We talked about the possibility of cross-custody, each couple raising the baby they'd delivered and establishing visitation with the baby that matched their DNA. We talked about the alternative, exchanging infants shortly after birth, placing each with their genetic parents. We talked about the hospital logistics, about bracelets and bands and signatures and how to make sure no additional errors happened, as if that was the only kind we needed to worry about. At one point, Evan asked, quietly, "What does it do to a person to be handed off like that? On day 2 or day 10? No one had an answer that wasn't just a more careful way to say, "We don't know." Aaron had a list of questions in his phone. They were all practical and colorless. Tax implications, insurance coverage, travel for visits. He looked so composed. Later, I would realize he looked free. Lena asked if we could meet outside the clinic. "Just us," she said, motioning between me and her. "No doctors, no lawyers. Maybe we could talk like people." I said yes before anyone else could say no. We met at a coffee shop that has plants everywhere and an espresso machine that sounds like a tiny train. We ordered pastries we didn't eat and sat at a small table near the window where the light made everything look kinder than it felt. Up close, Lena looked tired in the way pregnant women do. Beautiful and worn, a candle burning at both ends and somehow still lit. She asked me about my nausea, whether I could handle coffee if I'd switch to decaf. We talked like strangers who'd discovered they had the same scar. "I feel like there's no right answer," she said, twisting her napkin. "Every option feels like a wrong one dressed up in nicer clothes." "I know," I said. "People keep saying best interests of the child, and I keep thinking, which child, and which interest, and who decides?" She looked down at her cup. "Evan wants to fight for our baby, the one you're carrying. And I understand that. I do. But I don't know. The idea of taking a newborn out of the only arms they've ever known, even if those arms are yours." She trailed off, shook her head. "I hate every sentence I just said." "I hate mine too," I said. "Then, if you keep the baby you deliver, and I keep the baby I deliver, I'm scared they'll grow up and hate us for not trying to fix it." "And if we exchange?" she said. "I'm scared they'll grow up and hate us for letting them be delivered into the wrong story." We were quiet for a while, listening to the barista steam milk. Outside, a little boy in a dinosaur jacket jumped over the same crack in the sidewalk 6 times like it was lava. "My husband," I started, then stopped, unsure how honest to be. "He thinks we should settle. He thinks a clean break is clean. Evan doesn't. He wants to fight. He says biology matters most. He says he'll regret it forever if we don't." "And you?" She took a breath so deep it sounded like a sob hiding inside. "I want to be a mother who doesn't cause harm on purpose," she said. "I want to do the least damage. But I don't know what that is." "Me either," I said. "Sometimes I think the bravest thing would be to make the swap and pretend this was all a weird dream. Other times I think the bravest thing is to admit there is no swap that fixes anything and figure out how to be in each other's lives in a way that isn't a knife." Lena smiled, small and sad. "I liked you the second you said you wouldn't sign anything at the meeting. I liked you when you asked about movement," I said. We exchanged numbers. No lawyers. Just 2 women with a shared disaster and a promise to tell each other the truth. That night Aaron slept in the guest room, which was his version of conflict resolution. Distance, then morning. I lay awake thinking about bracelets in hospitals, about tiny hats, about that little boy jumping the crack in the sidewalk. I pictured 2 babies with the wrong name tags, and then with the right ones, and I couldn't decide which image made me sicker. Sometime around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Evan. I got your number from Lena. Sorry to text late. I need to say this clearly. I intend to pursue custody of our biological child. I respect you. I know this is hard, but I can't not fight." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed and erased about 12 replies. In the end, I wrote, "I hear you." Half an hour later, another message. "Also, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Apologies are strange currency in situations where nobody can pay." In the morning, Aaron made coffee and asked if I'd slept. I said not really. He said he'd been up thinking too. Then, carefully, he told me he'd reached out to a lawyer just to understand our options. and that there were paths that could spare us a drawn-out battle. Spare who? I asked again, softly this time. He didn't answer. We were each speaking to a different jury. The third meeting was the worst. Not because of a new revelation, but because the hope that someone else would decide for us had evaporated. The mediator asked us to outline our preferred outcome and our acceptable compromises. The phrase acceptable compromises felt like a joke. Evan spoke first. Our preferred outcome is to raise our biological child, he said, steady and polite. We are open to an arrangement where the Harpers are significant in his or her life from the start. He said it like a contract clause. I heard the ache underneath. Lena squeezed his hand but didn't add anything. I could see the fight inside her, love as a tug-of-war between two good things. Aaron said our preferred outcome was a mutually beneficial settlement that ensures both children are provided for and minimizes prolonged conflict. He did not say the words custody or keep. He did not say the word parent. When it was my turn, my throat was raw. My preferred outcome is not to rip two newborns away from the only bodies they know, I said. My acceptable compromise is, I don't know. I don't have a phrase for handing my heart to a court. Silence. Pen scratches. The thermostat clicked on. Dana, the mediator, leaned forward. Sometimes the only way through is to build something that didn't exist before, she said. A family structure that doesn't have clean words. You don't have to decide today, but you do have to start imagining it. I wanted to hate her for how gentle she sounded. Instead, I stared at the tissues in the middle of the table and thought about how someone had placed them there, expecting tears like you expect coffee at breakfast. We left without a decision. Again, in the parking lot, Lena caught my arm. I know Evan sounds absolute, she said quickly. He's scared. He thinks certainty is the same as safety. I know, I said. So do most men I've ever met. She laughed, startled. Then she got serious. If either of us ends up not raising the baby we deliver, could we still be there? At the hospital? Not for the handoff. I don't think I can survive the word handoff. But for the moment of knowing they're here. I pictured it. 2 women in the same hospital, 2 rooms, 2 cries, 2 sets of bracelets. A nurse at a station trying not to say the wrong thing. I nodded, tears in my eyes. Yes, I said. If we go that way, then yes. She looked relieved in a way that broke me a little. We didn't hug. We aren't that kind of story. On the drive home, Aaron said, we need to have our own line, separate from them, separate from the emotions. This is why we hire professionals. I am a person, not a business, I said. And this is not a rebrand. He drummed his fingers on his knee. You're being emotional. I am pregnant with a child who isn't genetically mine while another woman is pregnant with mine, I said. If I'm not allowed to be emotional now, then the word doesn't mean anything. He stared out his window. I'm trying to keep us afloat. Maybe I'm trying to keep us human, I said. We didn't speak the rest of the way home. That night, after he went to the guest room again, I stood in the bathroom with the light off and pressed my palm to my belly, waiting for flutters. When I finally felt them, like a moth beating against a porch light, I cried in the dark where no one had to watch me choose names for a baby whose future I couldn't predict. I didn't sleep. Around dawn, I opened a new note on my phone and typed, "Don't sign anything without my own lawyer. Put everything in writing. Hospital plan for both scenarios. Ask Olivia to be there no matter what. Buy a second set of tiny hats." The list made me feel better and worse. At 7:12 a.m., Lena texted me. This is going to sound weird, but I had a dream last night that our kids knew each other before we did. Like they were waiting in the same room and we were late. Maybe that's dumb. I don't know. Hope you slept. I stared at the screen and felt something unclench. Not dumb, I wrote back. If there's a room like that, I hope it had good light. We didn't decide anything that day. Or the next. Decisions, it turns out, like to arrive last, after you've run out of better options and your heart has built a callus where it keeps scraping the same edge. But a week later, the clinic called with dates. Due dates, give or take. Mine first, then hers later. and something in me shifted, from the fog of meetings into the narrow, bright beam of countdown. There are some realities you can't keep in a consultation suite. Aaron came home late that night. He smelled like the office, coffee and recycled air and a little desperation. "I'm staying at a hotel this week," he said, like he was noting a calendar change. "Things are tense." I nodded because what else was there to do? After he left, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, the exact place I'd stared at 2 pink lines not that long ago. I put my hand on my belly and said out loud, to the air and the humming fridge and whoever was listening, "I don't know who you belong to, but I know you belong somewhere safe." The refrigerator kept humming. The house kept being a house. My body kept being a room. The calendar kept moving. I didn't know the exact moment when waiting became a way of living. First, it was waiting for the next appointment. Then for lab results. Then for another meeting that always ended with "we'll reconvene." Now it was waiting for a due date. Waiting to see which kind of heartbreak we'd end up with. The pregnancy went on like a slow hurricane. Aaron had moved out, temporarily. His stuff was gone. His scent faded from the pillows, but his toothbrush stayed in the cup, like a decoy. We still texted sometimes, practical things, insurance updates, doctor names. He'd signed paperwork with his usual precision, detached and neat. I stopped reading old messages. Every "good night" felt like it belonged to someone else. Olivia was my constant. She came to every appointment, wrote down the doctor's words like a stenographer, and squeezed my hand whenever I started crying for no reason. She was the one who made me start saying "my baby" again. Not the baby, not the embryo, but my baby. "I don't care about their paperwork," she said. "You're the one throwing up, not the clinic." By the 7th month, I'd memorized every creak in the nursery floor. It wasn't fancy, just a small room with a rocking chair, a stack of folded blankets, and 2 empty picture frames I didn't know how to fill yet. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and just sit there, rubbing my belly, whispering stories about anything that wasn't lawyers or court dates. Sometimes I'd imagine a parallel version of me doing the same thing somewhere else. Lena, my mirror. We texted every couple of days now, short, strange, tender messages. She'd tell me when her ankles swelled. I'd tell her when the baby had hiccups. It was surreal. 2 women connected by biology's cruel joke, comforting each other about heartburn and insomnia. One night she wrote, "Evan wants to name him Noah. I don't even know if that's your name to give. Or ours. Isn't that insane?" I wrote back, "Name him what you love. They can have more than one story." She answered with a heart emoji. It made me cry. Then, 3 weeks before my due date, the clinic called again. Dr. Price's voice was different this time. Less professional, more human, maybe even scared. He said Lena had gone into premature labor. She was in the same hospital where I was scheduled to deliver. And she'd asked for me. I was at work when he told me. I just stood there, phone pressed to my ear, hearing him say things like, "stable," and "under observation," and "the baby's in NICU." But all I could think was it's ours. Our embryo. Our DNA. My baby in someone else's arms. Her baby still inside me. The world tilted in ways I didn't know how to fix. I went to the hospital that evening. I told myself I just needed to see her, to make sure she was okay. Olivia came with me, refusing to let me walk in alone. The nurse recognized my name and hesitated, like she'd been briefed. Then she led us down the hallway to a private room. Lena was sitting up in bed, pale and exhausted, her hair sticking to her forehead. She looked fragile and radiant at the same time. Beside her was an incubator, small and glowing softly like a lantern. Inside was the tiniest human I'd ever seen. Red, wrinkled, furious with life. "He's okay," she whispered, voice trembling. "They say he's strong. Small but strong." I didn't trust my legs. I stood at the door, one hand over my belly, as if my own child might hear and understand. Lena looked at me and smiled weakly. "Do you want to see him?" I nodded. She gestured for me to come closer. Up close, the baby's fingers were like threads of light. His chest rose and fell fast and determined. My tears hit the plastic wall of the incubator before I even noticed I was crying. He's beautiful, I said. She nodded. I know. For a long time, we just stood there in silence. Two women watching the same heartbeat for different reasons. A few days later, she was discharged, but the baby stayed in the NICU. She texted me updates every day. He's up to 4 pounds. He keeps pulling out his feeding tube like a rebel. Evan cried today. I didn't know he could. Meanwhile, my due date crept closer. I tried to keep breathing, eating, working, pretending I had control over any of it. Aaron called once, said he wanted to be there when things happen. And I told him I didn't know if I wanted that. He said, I'm still the legal father. I said, then act like it. He hung up. When my labor started, it wasn't dramatic. Just slow, steady pain that came and went like a tide. Olivia drove me to the hospital. On the way, she made jokes to distract me, bad ones, but they worked. When we checked in, the nurse looked at my file, then at me, then said softly, You're the other one. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. The delivery took 12 hours. I screamed. I cried. I begged for it to stop. And then it did. And there he was. They placed him on my chest. Pink, slippery, alive. He blinked, made a small sound, and curled his fist around my finger. And in that instant, nothing else existed. Not the clinic, not Aaron, not the law. Just me and this tiny miracle who somehow trusted me first. The nurse said, Congratulations, Mom. And I didn't correct her. The hospital administrators came the next morning, polite but tense. They talked about paperwork, protocols, temporary custody. I stopped listening. I wasn't handing my son to a clipboard. Then a knock. Lena. She stood there, still weak from her own recovery, holding a stuffed bear. When she saw the baby in my arms, her face folded into something complicated and beautiful. Grief, joy, awe. I needed to see him, she said quietly. I nodded. I understand. She took a slow step forward. He looks like you. I laughed softly. That's biology playing tricks. She smiled. Maybe it's more than biology. We sat together for a long time. No lawyers, no husbands, just us and 2 babies somewhere between us. When he started to fuss, she reached out instinctively. Not to take him, just to touch his little hand. He gripped her finger, and she gasped. I think, she whispered, they both belong to us, just in different ways. I started crying again. Then we'll figure it out, I said. Even if nobody tells us how. She nodded. Promise me one thing, that no matter what happens, court, custody, whatever, they'll grow up knowing they were both wanted. I promise, I said. Both of them. A week later, after we were both home, I received a letter from the clinic's lawyer. It said the couples had reached an interim agreement. Both children would remain with the mothers who delivered them until further legal review. I read it twice, then folded it and threw it into a drawer. For once, I didn't care about legal terms. I cared about the morning light coming through the window, the way my baby's breath sounded when he slept, the small squeak he made before sneezing. Aaron stopped by once. He brought flowers and said he wanted to discuss arrangements. I told him the only arrangement that mattered right now was between me and my son. He looked at me for a long time, maybe realizing I didn't need him anymore, and left the flowers on the counter. They wilted 2 days later. I didn't throw them away. They were a reminder. Things die when you stop watering them. Months passed. Lena and I talked every week. We sent pictures, first smiles, messy bottles, the works. We joked that our boys were cosmic twins, born of one disaster and one miracle. Sometimes we cried together, too. The court dates were postponed, then delayed again, then quietly deprioritized. Maybe the universe decided to let us figure it out ourselves. And we did. Slowly, awkwardly, beautifully. Our families became this strange hybrid: visits, birthdays, holidays. No labels, no scripts. Just love with messy edges. 5 years later, people still ask me how we managed. How we didn't go insane or hateful or vindictive. I usually smile and say, because the kids were watching. Sometimes I still think about the day in that consultation room. The tissues, the humming lights, the word solution printed in bold. There was never one. There was only living with what we couldn't undo. Aaron and I finalized our divorce a year after the birth. He remarried. I kept my last name. My son carries mine too. As for Lena, she's family now. We live 2 towns apart. The boys call each other brother. Every summer we take them to the same beach, build lopsided sandcastles, and pretend we've always known each other. Maybe that's the real ending. Not courts or paperwork, but the quiet proof that love can survive chaos. Sometimes, when both kids are asleep after a long day, we sit on the porch with cheap wine and talk about everything that's happened. She'll laugh and say, "Do you ever think about how it all started with a lab mistake?" And I always answer the same way. Yeah, but maybe it wasn't a mistake after all.